Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 14th of June, and we're getting ready for Parshas Shelach. I'm going to bring this up on the screen, and there it is. Layla and I are on our way to New York. We're on the road. We're going to be spending Shabbos this week with family. So this class is being delivered from an undisclosed location. We're on the way, so we're actually we're almost in New York, so we'll get there. But in the meantime, there's no reason why we still can't have our Chumash here, and this is the wonderful use of technology. So let's see. I'm going to share some great sources on Parshas Shelach. I don't know if you've seen these before. This first one is very interesting, incredibly out of the box, but so interesting. Before we jump in, let's just review Nekudos for a second. We have on page 1 a chart of the Hebrew Nekudos. So let's take a look at the first line, starting on the right side. The first 5, these are very, very common Nekudos that we'll see. Actually, the whole first line is very common. Kamatz on the right, that makes the ah sound, like kamatz. The under the kuf is that kamatz. And then you have a patach, that's that's under the pei and patach. Then you have tseirei. Tseirei makes the a sound. That's what's under the tzadi in tseirei. Then you have segol. That's the 3 dots. That makes and that's what's under the samach. You have shiva. The shiva is the I sound. That's what's under the shin. You have the cholam. That's what makes the o. And that's what's over that vav over there. Sometimes a cholam could have a vav, sometimes without, as long as it has that dot. And now we're just going to see 3 on the bottom line. So let's start with the one all the way on the left. Shuruk, that's kind of the opposite of the cholam. That sometimes has the vav, sometimes not. That's the u sound. But it's also could be the kubutz. You see the kubutz is also the 3 dots in a diagonal. That's u. And I'll go 2 to the right, chirik. Chirik is 1 dot, that's the e. For today's Divrei Torah, what we're going to be focusing on are 3 nekudos. On the top line, the segol, that's the 3 dots, the segol. And then we have the 2 dots, which is the shiva next to it, and then on the second line, the chirik, the e. So we're going to just focus on those 3, the segol, the shiva, and the chirik. Okay, let's go to the first source. We're going to look at this pasuk. The pasuk tells us one of the heroes of Parshas Shelach. Remember the basic story in Parshas Shelach we're all familiar with is that Bnei Yisrael are in the Midbar. They're on the verge of going into Eretz Yisrael, and the nation decides we want to go about this in the natural order of events. We want to send in agents. We want to send in scouts to take a look at the land first, and that'll enable us to know how we want to enter and conquer and whatnot. That's what any force would do in a military campaign. We don't want to go into this operation totally depending on miracles. So they beg Moshe, let's go about this in a normal, natural fashion. Let's send in the spies. And we know that of the 12 spies that go in, there's 1 for every shevet. Of the 12 spies that go in, only 2 of them remain faithful to Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is Kalev and Yehoshua. The other 10 come back with a terrible report. It demoralizes everyone. They cry about how they want to go back to Egypt. And the decree is given that that generation of men will not enter the land of Israel. For 40 years, they will wander. And then they will pass in the Midbar, in the wilderness. The kids will enter, and also the women of the generation will enter. There was no gezerah, there was no decree on them that they couldn't enter. Now, when I ask you, who were the 2 heroes? Who were the 2 spies who remained faithful to Moshe and to Hashem? We'll all say Yehoshua and Kalev. Let's see how the pasuk refers to Yehoshua. So we're on the top source. It's Parak Yud Gimel, that's chapter 13. Pasuk Tazayin, that's verse 16. Ele Shmos Anashim. So this is when it's giving the account of who all the 12 people were, the scouts. So Ele Shmos Anashim Asher Shalach Moshe L'Soras Haaretz. These, we've just listed the names of the 12, and then the Torah tells us Moshe gave Yehoshua a new name. It says, Vayikra Moshe leHoshea ben Nun Yehoshua. Moshe changed Hoshea's name from Hoshea to Yehoshua. And Rashi quotes the Chazal that Yehoshua, why did he add the Yud? He added the Yoshua because it stands for Ka Hoshia. God should save you from the plot of the spies. Okay. Did you ever notice, how do we say son? Yoshua is called Yoshua ben Nun. How does the Torah always refer to him as Yeshua what? Not ben Nun. The Torah always calls him Yoshua bin Nun. Look at that. That's never, everyone, if you look at any time in the Torah says son of, it's always ben. Look back at our Nakudos. Ben should have a segel, 3 dots under it. In Yeshua's case, it's always Hosea or Yehoshua bin Nun with a chirik under it. What happened? Is this an accident? Obviously not. Every tikkun you look at, every Masorah we have, every tradition as to how that word is supposed to be pronounced, it is not pronounced ben Nun. It's not Hosea ben Nun. It's not Yehoshua ben Nun. It is always Hosea bin Nun. Yehoshua bin Nun. Again, with a chirik, not with a sagol. What happened? So I saw a couple years ago, and I looked it up, and I found it again. I saw that the Torah Tzmima of Baruch Halevi Epstein in his Tosefes Bracha, he raises this point. We've been quoting the Torah Tzmima, the Tosefes Bracha rather, a number of times this year. I love his ideas, and we're going to see one. This is totally out of the box, totally out of box. Get ready for this one. So I'm scrolling down again in the bottom of page 1. That's just from the title page of Tosefes Bracha. You see it's the same author as the Torah Tzmima, Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. Now we're going to page 2. We'll see what he does. This is really, really different. So get ready. So here we go. So he says, Vayikra Moshe LaHoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. Yesh lahayir. It's worth spending time on and pointing something out. Throughout the Torah, throughout Tanakh, Minukot Beis min Shem Ben, whenever you have the word ben, meaning son of, whenever it appears, what's the nekudos under the beis? It will always have shalosh nekudos. It should always have 3 dots, meaning a segel. That's what we said the 3 dots was called on page 1. It always is ben. If I ask you, how do you say son of, it would be ben. It's never been. It's always ben with a segel. Levad b'chol makom shenizkar Hashem. The only exception is when the name Yehoshua bin Nun. Yehoshua bin Nun minukara beis binukuda achas bechirik. The exception to the rule throughout Tanakh. Whenever you see this, you have a name, and then it's always ben. It's never bin. Bin is by Yehoshua with a chirik, with just 1 dot. V'zepela. I'm sorry, it goes kamo kan ubechol Torah. This is what you'll find here by Yehoshua. You'll find this everywhere else in the Torah too. Whenever Yeshua's name is mentioned, it's always Yeshua bin Nun with a chirik. Everywhere else is always ben. For every other person. Throughout Mikra. V'zepela. It's astonishing. Lo yitakein shlo yeh b'zeh tam miyuchad. It's impossible that there's not a good reason for this. There's got to be a good reason why it is that the Torah chooses to write it this way. And then he finds, the Torah Tzmima, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein finds there is one other place in Tanakh where you'll see it is spelled with a chirik as bin. He says, Va'amnam, however, Nimsa od nakud kazeh pamachas. There's one other place in all of Tanakh where you'll find this. I find this amazing because he didn't have Google. This means that he had a mastery of Tanakh. And this is not going back to the Tanoim or Amoraim. You're talking about Baruch Halevi Epstein living at the turn of the 20th century. It's amazing, how dependent we've gotten on all these tools, our muscles. Whenever we don't have to rely on our memory, on our brains, the muscles weaken. I always tell my students at school that back before we had cell phones, growing up as a kid, I had to remember all my friends' phone numbers. I knew all my buddies. I knew their phone numbers. And why? Because how else are you going to call them? Now, I don't even know my home phone number because it's in my phone. If I need to call home for some reason, I just go to the contact list in my phone book and I'll call home. I don't have to remember any phone numbers. As soon as you don't have to exercise a part of your mind, the muscle weakens. So that's what happened. Anyhow, here's Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein says there's one other place in all of Tanakh where you'll find ben written as bin. Where is that? Vu b'mishlei. It's in Proverbs. In Mishlei, it's Perek Lamed, Pasuk Aleph, Divrei Agur bin Yakah. So it's apparently in Mishlei, again, I didn't look up this Pasuk, who was Agur ben Yika, whatever. But there you'll see bin is also spelled bin. V'sham Menuka Rabbi is bechirik. There too, that's the only other place aside from Yeshua bin Nun. There in Mishlei, you'll see that bin by Agur bin Yika. There it's spelled also with a chirik. That's how it's punctuated. But there you'll find Chazal, they make a point to explain this. And in the Midrash, and then they'll have a whole drush, they'll have a whole homiletic explanation. But why is it that Hashem chose that or Shlomo HaMelech, chose when he was recording his Mishalim in Mishlei, his Proverbs, that he wants to have in his bin? That's the one place, and Chazal jump all over it. V'hu b'Medrash Rabbah, you'll find that in Medrash Rabbah, Parshas Va'era, Parsha Vav. V'drash kazeh, ein lo kol sheichus l'shem ben kan, is that whatever they darshan over there about that bin in Mishlei, it has no connection to here. Again, I did not look up that Medrash, how they explain why is it that it's bin with a chirik in Mishlei in that one spot. But Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein says that has absolutely nothing to do with Yoshua bin Nun. The Chazal lo amdu kan al zeh, and here we don't find anyone. Chazal, they don't darshan on this. Lo iru lo darshu, they don't even make a point of it. They don't darshan. Nobody makes a point. Gama mefarshim, also all the commentaries of the Torah, avru al zeh, they pass by this k'mo bli masim with nobody taking notice. V'zeh pela gadol, it's astonishing. So he says, I basically feel a responsibility. I have to step in. You have this wild situation here where it's spelled bin with a chirik, and it's never spelled that way. There's one place in Mishlei where it's spelled that way, and Chazal jump all over it. Here, it has nothing to do with how they explained it in Mishlei. Nobody comments. None of the local Mefarshim, the Achronim, the Rishonim, Chazal, there's nothing. He says it's astonishing. I feel the need to get involved. Why here by Yoshua is the nikud? Why is it that the punctuation is bin when that's totally not the normal how to do things? So look what he does. This is, again, so out of the box, but it's very cool. The Efshar Lahazbir says, so here's how I think we can explain this. Al Pi HaMavur b'Sanhedrin, based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin. V'chein b'Midrashim, and it's also in the Midrashim. The Yud Anitel, where did this Yud come from, right? Moshe changed Hoshea's name, the Pasuk said, that Moshe took his name, which had been Hoshea, and he changed it to Yehoshua. Where did that Yud come from? He added a Yud. Where did the Yud come from? So we all know, Leila here in the background saying she remembers this from school too. We were all taught this in school. It's based on Gemara in Sanhedrin. It says, the Yud, Anitel Mishem Sarai, Sarah's name used to be Sarai, and then she got a Hey. So that Yud that was taken from Sarai, that Yud was upset. Like, what do you mean? Now I'm not going to be used. I was attached to such a tzaddikas, and now I'm not going to be used anymore. So that Yud, which had been put on the shelf from Sarai's name when it became Sarah, after her name became Sarah, it had a complaint. Torah. It's not fair. I was removed from the Torah. I was always associated with that great tzaddikas Sarai, and now my Yud is gone, and it's not in the Torah anymore. Ad Sheba Moshe, so comes along Moshe, V'osiv Yud, L'Shem Hoshea. So then Moshe takes that Yud, he says, Yud, I feel sorry for you. Never, you were kicked off the stage. I'm going to take that Yud and I'm going to add it to Hoshea's name, V'nishtana Shemo Yehoshua. Now it becomes Yehoshua. V'tosefes Yud, because now Hoshea with an added Yud becomes Yehoshua. V'zeh Hushav La Yud, and that's how the Yud was returned, Shenevda Mishem Sarai. That's what the Gemara says. Many of us are familiar with that this wasn't a random letter. This was a very intentional act. There was a Yud which had once played a role in the name of a tzaddikas. It was taken away for whatever God's reasons were. So now Moshe gives it back. He says, okay, now I'll give it to Hoshea. It'll be associated with a different tzaddik. And that's where the Yud comes from. Okay, that's the Gemara. Now look what Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein does with this. Vinei Adayin Kasha. But the matter is still a bit perplexing. So good. Moshe found there is a reason to take this Yud. It's not just a random letter. There was a Yud that had, so to say, been taken off the stage from Sarai's name, and he gives it to Hoshea to become Yoshua. So that's great. I get it. Now I understand where you got that Yud from. However, Avol Efo Matzalosif Nekudos. Where did Nekudos come from? In other words, Nikud is punctuation. When Sarai, when that Yud was being used in Sarai's name, did it have any Nikudos under the Yud? No. And now when you're giving the Yud to Hosea, it becomes Yehoshua. Those two dots are called the Sheva. Where did the Sheva come from? Where did the two dots come from? Ki Yud b'shem Sarai yavo below Nikud klal. If you're taking the Yud from Sarai's name, there was no Nikudos under that Yud. It's just a basic Yud. And now Vayud B'Shem Yehoshua Menukad B'Shva. Now it's got two dots under it. It's a Shva. You have to explain to me, where did those dots come from? Okay, you can explain to me where the Yud came from. The Yud came from Sarai. Well, where did the two dots from the Shva come from? Shtei Nekudos. Where did that come from? Kiyadua, it's known. But Mispar Nekudos B'Torah Meduyak Mitzumtzam. We have a Masoretic tradition about what is our Masorah, about how the Torah is supposed to be punctuated. You can't just grab two dots, this nikud out of nowhere, and there was a certain amount of nikudos that were in Tanakh. Where did those two nikudos, where did the shva come from? Lo pachos v'lo yaser. You can't have any less, you can't have any more. Where did Moshe find the authority? Where did he find permission to take those two nekudos of the shva and add it to the yud? I get you found the yud, good. But where'd you get those nekudos, those two dots to make the shva? So what does he suggest? Moshe chapped those two dots. He took them out of the segol. Because what was originally under Ben? It was originally Hoshea ben Nun. There's three dots under the bays, a segol, three dots. So there's three dots there. So if you want to take a yud from Sarai and you want to give that to Yoshua, now you've got to find two dots. Okay, so you took two dots from under the bays. Under the bays was Ben, so you took two dots to make the two dots now under the yud, so it's Yehoshua. What's left under the bays if I took two dots from the three? What's left under the bays? One dot. That's a chirik. Look at that. Moshe took those two dots from under the bays because there are three. If you're going to have Ben, which is what the word should be, so there was supposed to have been three dots there. He took two of them to give to the Yud, so the Yud should have some nekudos. The Tachas HaSegol, now, since there's no Segol, because you took two dots from the three from under the bays, Kava Chirik. What's left is a chirik. What's left is just that one dot, which makes an E sound. Nishar bin, the chirik. Now, instead of being pronounced ben, it's pronounced bin with a chirik. That explains Yoshua bin Nun. Now look how he concludes. Even though what I just said, my idea, it's very, so to say, it's very thin. It might be kind of, you might say, wow, that's yeah, it might not hold water, and it's bilti ragil, it's out of the ordinary. He's acknowledging this is totally out of the box. Nonetheless, I feel compelled to say it because something has to explain what's with this bizarre nikud, what's with this bizarre punctuation that everywhere else it's spelled ben and here it's spelled bin. How do you explain that? So he says, because of that, Roy Hulakablo, I think it's worthy to be accepted. I think it's worthy to share, and I think you have to really judge it on its merits. I thought that is such a cool shot. Again, just go back up to the chart and let's look at that. So again, on the top line, you see a segol with three dots. That was originally under the bays for Ben. That's what it should have been. And then Moshe added a yud to make it Yehoshua. So what's under the yud? Two dots, the shva. Okay, great. You got a yud from Sarai, but there was no nikud under the yud in Sarai. Where'd that shva come from? So he's suggesting he chapped it. He took two dots from the segol because under the bays, and he gave those two dots to the yud. But now if you take two of the three away from under the bays, what's left? Just one dot, a chiri, on that bottom line. And that explains Yeshua bin Nun, why it is that he's called Yeshua bin Nun. Fascinating. Again, totally out of the box, but I thought it was a very cool shot. I wanted to share that. That's number one. We're now going to share a second Dvar Torah, and this is related to this, because the $1 million question that you'll find about Moshe changing Yehoshua's name is why did he only change Yeshua's name? You could say, okay, he had good feelings because he was a student, but it doesn't seem that way from Chazal. It seems that, there was something specifically about Yeshua. Even Kalev, who ended up being on the right side of things, he didn't change his name. What was it about Yehoshua? It almost made it seem like Yeshua had a predisposition that he could have gotten caught up with the bad Chevra, with the bad group of Meraglim, of the spies. What was it about Yehoshua that had Moshe so concerned? So you'll see that many of our commentators are bothered by that question. It's a very logical question, and they offer various ideas, various theories. We're going to look at one that I saw this year from Rabbi Binyamin Kamenetsky. I've got there a picture on the bottom of page 2. This is Rabbi Binyamin Kamenetsky and his Sefer. Rabbi Binyamin Kamenetsky was a son, I believe the oldest son, of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, we've quoted from him many times in our Shirim. So Rav Yaakov had, his oldest son was Rav Binyamin Kamenetsky, who lived on the south shore of Long Island. And he built a very large yeshiva, an elementary school and high school. And now it's called Yeshiva South Shore of Long Island. So it's like in the 5 towns area. He played a very, very big part in helping turn the 5 towns of Long Island into a real established Orthodox community, really laying the groundwork, the framework for all that developed over the years. He played a very big role in that. So after Rabbi Binyamin Kamenetsky passed away, his family members and his students, they collected a lot of his Divrei Torah that he had shared over the years in these 2 volumes, and they called it Chelkas Binyamin. So I don't remember when it was. It could have been a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I saw this being advertised, so I bought it, and I look at it every now and then. I found some beautiful ideas in there. So I want to share with you a wonderful idea that I saw from Rabbi Kamenetsky. So let's see. We're on page 3 now. Adua hispalel Moshe rak al Yehoshua. Why is it that Moshe only davened for Yehoshua? If he had a premonition that there was problems coming, why is he only davening for Yehoshua? So let's see. Hachshash Yehoshua yimashech achar meraglim. He had good reason to suspect or good reason to fear that Yehoshua was going to be drawn after the other spies. So he says as follows: Terem tseis hameraglim l'Eretz Yisrael. Before the scouts or the spies, before they leave on their mission to go into Israel, Hosif Moshe Yud Lishmo Shel Yehoshua. Moshe added a Yud to Hoshea's name, changing his name to Yehoshua. Moshe Namar, like it's written, Vayikra Moshe LeHoshea ben Nun Yehoshua. Okay. Hatam Shehosif Moshe Rabbeinu Yud Lishmo Shel Yehoshua. Why did he give him this Yud? So he says, Amr b'Gemara, the Gemara says in Sota, Shemoshe Rabbeinu Hispalel Bad Yehoshua. By adding this Yud, he was essentially saying a prayer. Ka, meaning Yud Hey, that's the name of God, Yoshiacha Me'atza Samaraglim. God should save you. God should protect you from getting dragged in with the plot of the spies. Rabim Tamahu, many of our commentators are bothered by, and they ask the question, Lama Ispalo Rak Bad Yehoshua. Why did he only daven for Yehoshua? Below Ispalo Gamal Shara Meraglim, and for nobody else. It almost makes it sound as if there was some weakness in Yehoshua that Moshe really felt he's the one who needs my prayers. The others, whoever the bad apple is, I can't help. The others have enough mettle, they've got enough spine, they've got enough whatever it takes, moxie, to stand up and do the right thing. Yehoshua is the one I'm worried about. That's what it seems to imply, but how do we understand that? So let's see. Vinay b'targum Yonasan Tirgum. One of the Targums are the Aramaic translations of the Torah. So there's the famous one of Onkelos, and there's a second one you'll find in your Mikros Gedolos called Targum Yonasan. So Targum Yonasan has an Aramaic there. Now you got to remember again, every translation, by the de facto, a translation is a commentary, because a translation, by the fact that you chose different words to translate, you have a choice of words. Well, why did you choose those words? The words that you did, that's a commentary. So that's something just to always bear in mind. Every translation is by nature going to have to be a commentary, because it's impossible to find the same words in whatever languages that you'll find in Lashon Kodesh. Some might match up, but some you're going to have to choose, and that's when it becomes a commentary. And that's what we're going to see here. So he says, Hine b'Targum Yonasan, Tirgem. So in the Targum Yonasan, Here's how he translates it into Aramaic. Uchidei chama Moshe, and because Moshe saw in Vasanuse, the anivus can mean the modesty, it can mean the meekness. Kara Moshe Loshea Barnun Yoshua. Because Moshe saw there was some type of excessive modesty, there was anivus in Yehoshua. Because of that, that's why he changed his name from Hoshea to Yoshua. What does that mean? Nira Levayer, he says, how am I going to explain this? Sheyadua, it's well known, She'etzel Shar Meraglim, Hisisam Yitzram, Sheyavdu Nisiyasam Kasher Yichnesu Laretz. There's a medrash, it's actually the Zohar that's quoted, but it's midrashim that say that what was subconsciously motivating these Meraglim? We know that they were kulam anashim. They were not the dregs of society who were chosen to be the scouts. The pasuk says kulam anashim, that when they were given this mission, they were upstanding members of society. These people were really flag bearers of society. If that's the case, what motivated them that when they went to Eretz Yisrael, they come back with this negative report that demoralizes everyone and says, we want to go back to Mitzrayim. So there's a Zohar that says it was subconscious. And what happened is that while they were in the Midbar, these Meraglim had positions of authority. They were in positions of leadership. And subliminally, subconsciously, they were nervous that as soon as we go into Israel and the situation of the Jewish people changes, we're no longer going to have these positions. So therefore, we need to do whatever we can. We need to, so to say, gum up the works. We got to, do something to sabotage this idea of going into Israel. Otherwise, we're going to lose our position of authority. Again, they probably they weren't conscious of this because they would have said, wow, that's such a terrible motivation. But it was probably subconsciously, is that power and leadership and attention, it's the biggest drug. It's intoxicating. And the Zohar says that's what happened to them. They were so intoxicated by these feelings of importance and prominence that they didn't want to give it up. How do we give it up? How do we prevent it from being given up? By saying, okay, we're going to remain in the midbar, by getting people to say, we're not going into Eretz Yisrael. How do we get to keep our status? By maintaining status quo. That's how we do it. So let's look at what he says here. He says, Shiadua, it's known, She'etzel Shar Meraglim. When it came to the other Meraglim, Hasisam Yitzram, their evil inclinations, so to say, seduced them. Sheyavdu Nisiyosam, that they were nervous that they're going to lose their prominence, their position of power. Kasher Yichnesu Laretz, when the Jewish people would enter into Israel. L'chein, therefore, Hotziu ala Diba, that's why they came back and gave a bad report. Limnoa mi Yisrael, to prevent the Jewish people of Allah to enter Israel. He says, Ayin Zohar, that's what he quotes. The Zohar is really the source of that, and other sources quote that. Etzel Yoshua, when it came to Yoshua, Adarabba, to the contrary, Haya Cheshbon Hafuch, it was the opposite. Sharei Yoshua, what did Yoshua know? Shama es Eldad umeidad misnabim b'machaneh. Last week's parsha, Baaloscha, Yoshua heard, remember Eldad and Medad, those were those two people who had become Zakanim, they had been imbued with some degree of prophecy, and they started to publicly prophesize Moshe Meis v'Yoshua machnes es Yisrael la'aretz. Yoshua heard that these guys were prophesizing that Moshe and Aaron were going to die, and Yoshua would be the one to take the Jewish people into Israel. That's what Chazal tell us, and Rashi quotes it in last week's Parsha. That's what Chazal tell us, what it was that they were prophesying, Eldad and Medad, and what was it that Yoshua heard, and that's why Yoshua reacted, and said, Adoni Moshe Kilayim, lock them up, put them in prison. It's very disrespectful what they said. That basically you're going to pass from the stage and I'm going to take over. That's awful. Lock them up. Kilayim, lock them up. That was what happened last week. So meaning the other Meraglim, they were seduced saying, we want to keep our power. How do we keep our power? By preventing Bnei Israel from going into Israel. Yoshua was the opposite. Yoshua heard that upon entering Israel, he's going to gain power. He's going to be in a position of power because Moshe is going to die and Yoshua is going to be the one to take him in. That's what he heard Eldad and Medad saying. It was well known, it was clear to Yoshua that when he would enter Israel, excuse me, Yala Lios Manig Yisrael, his position would be raised and he would become the leader of Israel. Moshe Rabbeinu chashash liYoshua. So now what was Moshe worried about? Moshe was worried about Yoshua. Shemitzad avan an v'sanuso, that because Yoshua was such an anav, he did not want to be in a position of prominence. Yoshua wants to be under the radar screen. He does not want to be a leader. He does not see himself as being fitting to lead the Jewish people. And because of this, he was worried that maybe, God forbid, Yeshua will get sucked to the dark side to give a bad report about the land of Israel. Why? Because this would prevent Bnei Yisrael from going into the land, and now he wouldn't have to rise to a position of leadership. That's what, in other words, Yeshua's got the absolute opposite motivation as the other spies. The other spies, why do they want to give a bad report? Because in a sense, subconsciously, they were power hungry. They wanted to retain power. They wanted a position of power. Moshe knows about Yeshua that he's at the opposite extreme. Yeshua, the last thing he wants is to be a power broker. He doesn't want to be the maneg. He does not want to be the leader of the generation. That's what motivated him by the Eldad Medad situation to say, Moshe, lock them up. So he knows that. So he says, now I've got what to worry about with Yoshua. The other guys, who are going to go bad, it's because they've driven for power. But Yeshua, he's such an anav, he's not driven for power. So what's going to cause him to side with the Meraglim? Not that he's driven for power, but to the contrary. He does not want power. And in Yeshua's case, siding with them that Eretz Yisrael is a bad place to go and convincing people not to take that route is going to keep him from power. So that's what Moshe is worried about. He's such an anav, he doesn't want the power. That's why he might side with them. He might get swayed because he's got such a strong force pushing him that way. So the Meraglim have such a subconscious pushing them to retain their power that they'll have a bad report. Yeshua is the opposite. Because he's such an anav, he's so humble, he doesn't want to be in a position of prominence. That's going to motivate him to give a bad report. So that's why he's davening for Yeshua. That's why Targum Yonasan says, what was Moshe's concerns? Because Yeshua is such an anav, that's what has Moshe so concerned. What an interesting idea. So here it is that Yoshua has got the opposite motivation as the other Meraglim, but that opposite motivation might cause them to have the same report, that same negative report. The others are doing that negative report or bringing back that negative report out of their lust for power. Yoshua might have a negative report because his abhorrence. He doesn't want power. He doesn't want recognition. That's what happened. He doesn't want Moshe to die. He wants Moshe to retain his position of leadership. So that's what Moshe realizes. And that's why he says, I got to daven for Yoshua here. He's susceptible. Thought that was very, very cool pshat. And again, he's making use of our sources. We're going to look at one third source. This third source is very cool. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I saw this by my friend, Rabbi Shimon Feder, who lives down in Boca Raton, Florida. He's involved with Jewish outreach down there. And you'll see on page 4, there's a picture of his book. Let me scroll down there. You'll see a picture of his book. Came out this past year. It's called Psychology and Personal Growth in the Torah. And that's where I saw this idea. Beautiful idea. So let's see. We're going to see the Jewish people start to complain and cry that they don't want to enter the land of Israel. This is a terrible mistake. So it says around bottom of page 3. So it's chapter 14. It's Parak Yud Daled. The entire community raised their voices and they shout, and they cry out that night. They're weeping that night. They complain against Moshe and Aaron, Kol Bnei Israel, the entire Jewish people. They say, we would have been better off if we died in Egypt. Or even if we died in the wilderness. Why is God bringing us into this land of Canaan? To fall by the sword. Our wives and children will be as spoils. We would be better off going back to Egypt. So then they start to say, let's appoint a leader, and we'll go back to Egypt. That's what happens. So let's take a look at one of our commentaries here, the Chizuni. Very short piece, and I was not aware of this till I saw my friend Rabbi Feder quote it. So he says here to Chizkuni, "Halo tov lanu shuv Mitzrayim." We'd be better off in Egypt. The question is, why? Why would you be better off in Egypt? Okay, you don't like the situation you're in now, so you could say, okay, we were messed up in Egypt. We were slave laborers. We were treated like trash. Okay, why is it better in Egypt than what we're about to face in Israel? Why is that better? So let's see what the Chizkuni says. Halo tov lanu shuv Mitzrayim. Because at least when we were in Egypt, when one of us would die, they could give over their possessions, their whatever they had accumulated, they could give it over to their families, or at least to their friends, to their neighbors. But now, if we're going into Canaan and we're going to be wiped out, hakol lavaz, everything is going to be loot. Excuse me, everything will be looted from us. Our enemies who beat us, they'll take all of our possessions. If you stop and think about this Chizkuni for a minute, this is wild. What they're basically saying is, when we were in Egypt, we had it better. Why did we have it better? Yeah, we could die, we could get killed by an oppressor, but what would happen? At least then, whatever we had accumulated in this world, we could pass on to family and friends. If we go into the land of Israel and get killed, then whoever beats up on us, they're going to take all our stuff. That's why we had it better in Egypt. Now, if you stop and think about it for a minute, what did they have in Egypt already? They had some like filthy slave uniforms. They had their striped pajama uniforms that prisoners wore. They had some ugly pair of sandals. What did they have? They were a slave nation. But nonetheless, they still felt we had belongings. And it seems what they're saying, according to this Chizkuni, is there's a basic human need. There's a basic human drive that could drive us batty. And that is whatever we've spent time accumulating. It could be a fortune. It could be meager possessions. Whatever it is, I want to have some say that what I spent my life working on, at least when I'm gone, when I exit the stage, it doesn't just fall apart into wayside. Someone can still use it. Someone can still appreciate it. It's not going, what will I have left behind? We kind of, in a certain sense, have this need that my legacy will live on. What I've worked so hard accumulating in this world will continue to serve another person that I care about. It's a basic human need that we have. And if that need is not met, it drives us batty, and it can lead someone to do the most crazy, illogical things. And that seems to be what happened here. Here's Bnei Yisrael saying, why did we have it better in Egypt? We had it better in Egypt because at least there, if we would die, at least our stuff gets passed on to someone. And meaning what? I'd have some peace of mind of knowing that I may have met a terrible end, but at least whatever I had accumulated in my life will help my family, it'll help my friend, it'll help my neighbor. Here, what's going to happen if we go into Israel and get beat by our enemies? Our stuff is going to get taken from us, and our enemies are going to enjoy it. Our friends, our family, no one's going to have it. And that just drives me batty, and that can lead someone to do the most irrational thing, which is what happened here. That they were crying. Here they were living on mud and living on the Be'er Miriam, had the Torah, all that, and had miracles all around them, and now start to complain that we can't go into Israel. It makes no sense. But what could have motivated in that? The fact that this very real human need that the Chizkuni is shedding light on, they felt was not being addressed. And if that's not being addressed, it could lead people to make terrible, terrible mistakes. And that's what happened here. I think what we can learn from this is, number one, we can better understand human psychology. We can understand the way we're hardwired, and we can understand some of the decisions and stuff that you'll see sometimes people make when it comes to their legacies, when it comes to what they're leaving behind and whatnot. But I think what it also does is it really helps us tap. And this might be something we don't think about too often because we don't really think about our mortality. We don't really think about the fact that we're mortal human beings and that we're going to have to exit the stage at some point. People tend to only think about that at the end of their lives. But if we start thinking about it now and start making some decisions now, well, what will be with my belongings, we might see that we'll give ourselves some peace of mind later in life, and it might really, really help us and keep us from making some poor decisions. That might mean looking into our insurance policies. Do we have a life insurance policy? Is it going to take care of our needs? Have I thought things through? Have I written stuff down? Do I have in my papers where I would like my belongings to go whenever it is that 120 years comes along, whenever it's time to exit the stage? Knowing that this is taken care of and knowing that there's a plan in place could really afford us a peace of mind and might help us have that peace of mind that could prevent us from making some terrible decisions and some terrible mistakes some other ways. But be that as it may, this is important to realize. According to the Chizkuni, who's one of our Rishonim, this really sheds some great light on human nature and what is brewing in the backs of our minds, how it is that we think, how we're hardwired, and how we're programmed. All right, so these are just a couple interesting thoughts on this parsha. Again, two of them had to do with Yehoshua and his name change. One had to do with why is it pronounced bin? Everywhere else it's Ben. Why is it bin? The next was why did Moshe specifically daven for Yeshua and not the others? And third, what was with that complaint? We had it better in Egypt. In what way did they have it better in Egypt? And the Chizkuni helps shed some light on that. All right, I'm going to stop the recording at this point.